So Ozzie, you're 32 and you've got 20 years of experience on boards. How does that work?
Well, I had my first role with the Met Police when I was 13 years old. And I started working with them on their independent advisory group around issues related to youth and policing strategy across London. And I did that for 6 years. From there, I just started building my career and kind of working with various different organisations. I moved on to working with London 2012 Games on their youth advisory panel, then with Business and Community, chairing their National Youth Advisory Panel. I had my first official trustee role in 2017 with the Royal National Institute of Blind People, which are close to my heart. I've got a sight loss condition myself. I've just been building my career, I suppose, really as an opportunity, both to kind of learn something new, learn some different sets of skills, but also kind of give back kind of where I can. RNIB, as you can imagine, was kind of both meet of like, here are some skills I have from my people background. I'm a people director in my day job, as well as kind of bring in the fact that I'm also one of the people that we are there to support who are blind and partially sighted as well. Currently, I sit on the board of A2 Dominion, as a non-exec director on the group board, and I'm an independent panel member for the Mayor of London's appointments.
So Ozzie, let's rewind back to that first role when you were 13. So you were on the independent advisory group for the youth for the Met Police. How on earth did that come about?
Well, it's a weird story. So going all the way back, one of my good friends, his dad, police officer in the local area, went to school in Tooting. He used to run a small group on the weekend where he'd help people kind of keep safe. So sell personal attack alarms, tag their belongings with kind of visible markers. I went every week because, afterwards he'd take us for a nice food, loved Indian food. It was a great opportunity, but we got invited by the Met to come to Scotland Yard one day. 500 of us were invited, young people, and then invited back another 180. I was chosen. And the second day I said to us, we want to form this youth panel that really looks at what are your views, experiences of London, and from a policing perspective, how can you help inform my strategy? And I was 13, one of the youngest people in the room, and whilst most people won't believe it now, I was incredibly shy as a kid, like incredibly shy. I wouldn't look at people. I would like chew my clothes, still pull my clothes down all the time. But I stood up in the room and I said, if we're here to represent all of young people's voices, I'm the youngest person in the room, and I think my voice also counts. And so that was my kind of pitch, and everyone in the room had to vote, and I got voted onto the panel. So that began my journey at 13.
Amazing. So for a shy 13-year-old, that's pretty epic to put yourself out there like that. And I guess that paved your way to governance and being on lots of different organisations' boards. So you probably didn't know the word governance at that point in time, I imagine.
Not at all. There was a huge amount of things I didn't know. And it was like, great, because I was a certain age. And so, I used to get driven home by the commissioner's bodyguard and really fancy Range Rovers. To me, it was great fun, some of this stuff, but also really interesting work. The stuff we got to do around stop and search and helping change the way the police arrange the training, how police officers approach young people. Part of the group got to go to Northern Ireland to work with young people over there and improving relations between young people and the police. And obviously, that's quite a fractious dynamic. It's just really, really powerful and impactful work that we got a chance to be involved in as well. So learned a huge amount, and governance becoming one of those things about how they work for organizations. And that's something I really took with me into a 2012 role, which was at a much bigger scale. Huge fan of the Olympics, huge fan of athletics and swimming and cycling, those kind of sports, and being at the heart of that, saying, how are they keeping this promise to inspire a generation?
So Ozzie, I'm going to give the list. So you talked about the Met Police, that independent advisory group for youth. You've got the London 2012 Organising Committee, Youth Advisory Panel Board, Rocking Your Teens CIC as a non-exec, Business in the Community, the National Youth Advisory Panel, the RNIB as a trustee, the Mayor of London Appointments independent panel member, community lead for Dope Black Men, and now you're on the board of the A2 Dominion Group. Have you ever been unsuccessful when applying for a board role?
Yeah, of course. Of course. Oh, yes.
Hear this and be like, I'm not getting one of them.
I think, look, it's like with anything you apply for, there isn't a route in where someone just gives it to you, right? You have to apply, and there have been many roles I've applied for. I think there were 2 roles last year, actually, which I applied for, both very, very different roles. One was a law firm, one is an auditing firm, and actually I got down to the final 2 in both those roles, but I actually learned really good things. I have some areas to grow, some skills to build around some of my professional skills. One of the roles I said, have you done international M&A? No, I have not done lots of international deals. And M&A can't bring experiences. So you've got to recognize sometimes where you don't have the right experience, but also take what you can from the interview process itself. unless we're looking for a new role, we're looking for new jobs, we don't do much interviewing in life. So it feels very sort of artificial. So I look at it as an opportunity to get the experience, but also remember what it's like to be on the opposite side of the table. You know, RNIB, or I chaired our people committee, and then was on our nominations committee. A huge amount of appointments, huge number of interviews, huge number of people I've met, the stuff we do with the mayor's office. And sometimes you forget what it's like being on the other side of the table, being interviewed, when you're always interviewing people and looking at what works and what doesn't work. And there are some things it's just experience, and sometimes you don't always put things across in the best possible way. We have better days and worse days.
And you're now 32. Whenever people look at a 32-year-old and look at your CV and what you've done so far, often I think they underestimate some of the things you might have been through. When you've been on lots of different boards, it massively increases the amount of exposure you've had to lots of different events that organisations might go through. And I know that you're on the board of the RNIB through a statutory inquiry and a financial crisis. So I guess I'd love to hear, like, what was that like?
Tough. You know, I'd say to everyone, being a trustee, and I think trustees, similar to non-execs, but I think very, very different when you're a trustee, because you are, you know, almost implicit in the word is that you are entrusted with this organization, and as a charity, it has means a huge amount to a community of people that you are there to support and in many ways to serve. I joined the board in September 2017. 6 months later, the statutory inquiry kicked off. We were put in a position where we were very, very clear that we had failings in terms of the safeguarding practices we'd put in place and how we looked after some children. We have hugely improved as an organisation since then, which I'm very proud to say. But at that point in time, I'd never seen anything like this before. You know, I remember getting a letter come from my door, the Charity Commission telling me that from this point onwards, if they interview me, it's under criminal caution. I have never been in trouble with the police. I've never had the police write to me for anything in my life. And so I'm like, what is this thing? But it is the true weight of what it means to be a trustee of organizations, that you have full responsibility for this organization and for what happens. And if you're going into that kind of role, you have to take that seriously. And that meant going for statutory inquiry as part of the board, deciding how do we respond to this? How do we regain people's trust in the organization? How do we also make sure the organization is stable through this time, but also as an individual? But I recognize it's also going to take a lot of your time to go through that process as well, because these aren't quick fixes. It's conversations, it's people's lives we're talking about, it's understanding the finances, reading different papers, and all of that stuff takes time. And sometimes it is just time you need to give, but even sometimes it's also your expertise. You know, my background has always been people, HR, organizational design, organizational development, and therefore it's helpful to bring in that skill set. So safeguarding is not just about incidents, it's about a culture change. How do we bring about the culture change in the organization to get us to a much better place? You know, the statutory inquiry is closed, we've successfully implemented all the recommendations, we're a much better organization. So when I stepped down last December, we're truly able to look back and go, actually, those 5 years have been a phenomenal period of growth and change for the whole organization. One, going to be very inward-looking, very outward-looking, actually, I think really shouting proudly for the needs of people who are blind across society and making sure they are treated fairly across society.
I imagine there is a big time commitment when you're going through that process.
Of course, it's a huge time commitment. There was a period of time, I remember when I felt like I was in the office every day or every other day or every couple of days, just because the intensity of what you're going through is really, 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 really serious. And you have to be there to make decisions as a member of the board. So it's you, with your other board colleagues, with other members of the executive team, other members of the senior leadership team, discussing what to do. And, you know, in the early days when that notice lands on the doorstep of the organization, most people in the organization also don't know what's happening. Yeah. Right? You are at a point where you can't tell people what's going on. You have to respond to the immediate failings and what's gone wrong or what the issue is. Make sure you're putting that right. And on top of that, you can't tell everyone in the organization. I think that's always one of the things I found was hardest being on the board, is that you build relationships with people at all levels of the organization, which is wonderful. But sometimes you also have to remember, like, what do I know that they may not know? When you're having conversations, people say, how's this, how's that? You've got to keep going. But all whilst knowing, actually, there are some really, really big, important decisions. And there were times where, I'll be honest, I was worried, because I'd never been through this before. Like, is the organization going to collapse? What happens if it does? What's going on here? How do I know what's going on? I wasn't around when some of the decisions were made, but I'm still responsible for them. And you can't go, well, that wasn't about me. I wasn't here. You're here in that seat, here and now. You are responsible for putting it right, and you have to take that accountability. And so that takes a huge amount of time. And so it's not something you can do lightly. And I think as a younger trustee, I think time sometimes is the hardest thing to manage.
Definitely. And I guess you never know when you join a board whether something like that's going to come up. So you have to go into it being up for that, being up for serving the commitment of the role in all eventualities. And like you said, it might not even be something that's happening in the organisation now. It might be something historic that's come up too. So alongside this, you're people director at Otter, tech recruitment organisation, and it's a scale up, went through Series A last year. I imagine you're quite busy with that as well.
Keeps me busy, keeps me very, very, very busy. We are about sort of 65 people full time in the team, and it's I love it. It's kind of my fourth, fifth, I can't remember now, startup that I've worked for, but obviously went for Series A last year, raised $20 million, and just growing. And I think what I love about this business is that we are focused on candidate first, and what's a better way for people to find a job in technology space. But also it gives me a real opportunity and I think real privilege to be the people director organization that's focused on helping people find jobs, which I quite like.
And how do you balance it with being a non-exec?
I think it takes experience, if I'm honest with you, but also just a real sense of dedication. You use the word commitment, and I think that's right. I had to learn since I was 13 how to balance going to school, doing the board stuff. When I was younger, there were times I said, "Mum, can I go to this?" She said, "No, you have to go to school." And as you get older, that happens when you're 13, right? I'm under 18. Mum, can I go? She goes, "No, you have to go to school," and that's that. The other time she goes, "Okay, you can go, but you have to pay your dues. You have to go to school. But more importantly, you have to balance out what you're doing and when." So that means there are some times when I will be up late reading my board papers because I've had to do lots of stuff. I had a busy day at work, and we've got a meeting coming up, and I want to make sure I get through the papers. The other days, actually, where I can take time out of work, go to my board meetings, go and meet other colleagues for lunch, or just catch up with them, because that's also an important part of being on the board, is building relationships with the other board members around you. And that balance, I think, is something you learn over a while. Once you get more comfortable in the actual role you're doing, as well as the non-exec role. I think the hardest thing I think you can do, and I think it's happened when I joined A2 Dominion. I joined A2 Dominion at the start of January 2021, and a week later started a brand new job. And that's really difficult because the learning curve on both was really steep. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I do what I'm doing there. And eventually it calms down, you get into pattern, you go, "Hey, this is how this works. That's how this works." And you can start to manage your responsibilities a bit better.
And so what do you think the benefits have been to Otter?
I think one of the benefits to me is obviously I've got a very different experience from other typical people directors or heads of people ops in the startup scale-up space, because one background came from big organizations like Thomson Reuters, then really boutique consultancy work with the likes of Sky or Bupa or PayPal. So I bring a huge set of that experience, but also having sat on boards, looking at governance, looking at how you do various different things across an organization, that's experience no one else in the room has. And so as we think about what we do, maybe with our board, or we think about, actually, there's some people who say to me, "I'd like to be on a board. How do I get involved with this charity?" So maybe say, actually, here's some advice, here's some input. And then for me on a day-to-day basis, I've just had a huge exposure to a broader breadth of things that in my day job I would have been exposed to, in terms of what it means to chair the people committee, to make sure we're setting the right kind of strategy from a DEI perspective, and how we do really large-scale cultural and organizational change. At one end, I've been involved in those projects internally, running bits and pieces of them. At the other side, I'm here overseeing that whole project, making sure it's happening, understanding what does it take to really shift the whole organization forward, and look back and go, do we have the right level of assurance actually those changes have happened? And therefore, I suppose in many ways my career is kind of built partly bottom up and top down. An organization kind of meeting in the middle. I think as I kind of enter my 30s, these two things are sort of coming a bit more together.
I think that's really important for people to hear who have full-time roles and they're looking at non-exec roles, looking at how you articulate that back to your line manager in your full-time role, of the value that that's going to bring. And I think that's really clear, Ozzie. You've had such a broader experience as a result of doing non-exec roles that really has benefited and come back to your full-time role. And
I would probably also add to that, it's also recognizing that what you're doing in your day job pays into the role you can play on the national board. So, at RNIB, I chaired the people committee. At A2 Dominion, made a very specific decision not to sit on our sort of governance remuneration committee, but focus on our customer services committee and work on our IT transformation committee instead. So I can both gain different experience myself, but also add different elements from my skill set. But I always come with this background in people, this background in HR. And so I can always bring that to the table. And many boards will have a people committee, a remuneration committee, or they have an audit committee, or there are certain committees you'll find across different boards, because it makes it easier for you to say, actually, where can I fit and where can I help and lend my skills? And sometimes it's audit, it could be cybersecurity, it could be finance, it could be branding and marketing, it could be any different kind of area. But you can often find boards are looking for skills people with certain skills to join the board to help complement the rest of the skills around.
So Ozzie, you're coming from a people HR background. We see an awful lot of board roles looking for finance skills and experience. It is broadening out. But what do you think the real benefit is to boards and having people with your background?
I think all boards, at any time you join them, are always going through some kind of culture change. They're always kind of shifting, moving, and having someone who understands the language of that around the table, I think, is really helpful. Depending on the organization, the person who leads sort of HR internally may not always sit on the leadership team. You might report to a chief executive, a chief operating officer. They might report to a shared service director, whatever it might be. Someone at the board table having that experience is really, really helpful when you're having certain conversations. It also means if you're restructuring or you're thinking, actually, what does our talent look like? How do you measure performance? You can bring a more informed perspective to the debate, as opposed to oftentimes people from their experience and their opinion. We go from an informed opinion of having done some of this work, seen the people challenging, going, actually, here's where I've seen this fall down, here's where I've seen this work really well. I think that helps. I think it's also quite nice when you have things like remuneration committees, often have kind of people who have HR backgrounds on those committees. But actually, even if you're just one of the people you can even chair, it's a good opportunity for you to get experience chairing one of those committees if you're that kind of HR person as well. Because chairing committees is also very different to just being on a committee or being on the board. That's also quite helpful. I think the other thing I'd say is, by and large, people in these kind of roles and HR roles tend to be really interested in people. And that's actually quite helpful because you tend to kind of just get out and know people and meet people around the organization, talk to them a bit more. And so you can also bring that perspective back to the table. I'm not saying other people don't, of course they do, but it's just a nice thing to do. I think lots of different people I've met along the way on my journey, I just got on with them, just go and have a chat with people.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. Not all non-execs do that. And I think it's a real value add in terms of taking the temperature of what the culture's like. If you're just asking the chief exec and the FD, you're probably not going to be finding out what the culture's really like. You want to get wider in the organisation. So what's it like in a boardroom, and how have you found it with A2 Dominion?
Boardrooms are, I mean, first time you enter a boardroom, they feel really intimidating because you're like, what is this? I got sent a whole pack of papers. I didn't fully understand all of this stuff. What's going on here? And there's a lot of jargon. It takes you a bit of time to get into the groove. And even at A2 Dominion, it took me some time to get into the groove of understanding all of my papers, how they're structured, how they're organized. And that's great. Most board conversations are around reaching some kind of consensus across the room. That doesn't mean everyone needs to agree, but you need to have an agreed way forward. And I think that's a really important thing. People think about like everyone agrees this, agrees that. Not everything you need to vote on. Sometimes you'll have a formal vote. Sometimes it's very clear that what the merger consensus is. Sometimes I actually say, I really disagree with this. And you put up a case, and it's not about catching people out. The most important thing you think about working with the executive team is we're not here, if you read a paper, to catch people and go, I caught this, you said this on page 1, but on page 25 it says this. That's not helpful. It's trying to build trust, to be supportive, but also critical and challenge. Your ultimate role is to seek assurance from the officers of the organization. And therefore, that only happens if you can build trusted, strong relationships with people. People won't want to talk to you, they won't want to engage with you if they feel like your whole job there is trying to catch them out. I'm not Columbo. I'm not here, to kind of spot all the inconsistencies. If there are, of course, you bring them up, but most people aren't going to have that in the paper. It's really to tease out what is most important. Why is this the right direction? How do we know this has been achieved? Those are the kind of things you're talking about and you're discussing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I guess for people that are going for their first non-exec role, what do you think is helpful for their sort of frame of reference and how they think through the difference between maybe the work that they've done before and their full-time roles to apply for their first board role?
Yeah, I've interviewed, I don't know, upwards of 100 people now for various different board roles. And the one thing that people always fall down on is separating strategic and operational. And most of our day-to-day jobs we're in operation, we're doing strategy, we're in operational capacity. We are the people doing the work in a way, day-to-day, they're helping to move things forward in the organization. That is not your role on the board. On the board, what people tend to fall down a lot is they're talked about, here's all the stuff that I've done, here's what I achieved, here's what I delivered, which is all fantastic. But what's missing is, on the board, your role is about influence, it's about assurance, it's about setting strategy, setting direction. So what I want to really hear from you is, here's how I have collaborated with the people to understand it. Here's how I've influenced the strategy. Here's how we have had to pivot or move direction. Here's how I've dealt with really difficult colleagues. That's really helpful because sometimes you're not always going to agree. So how did you handle a situation where you don't agree? How did you reach a point where you could agree? Like I said, not just you don't need to agree, but agree a way forward to move the dial on whatever it is you're talking about. Those are things I want to hear. Most of the time, that's not what you're hearing from people, but it's that strategic thinking. How do you set a strategy? How did you make sure a strategy was delivered? How did you seek assurance? How did you know when someone said, we're going to deliver X by X date, they delivered X by X date? And sometimes that's reporting. There's also conversations. We're changing the culture to be more collaborative. Or you can ask the leadership team, do you feel more collaborative? Yes, you can look at engagement survey, but sometimes you go and talk to some people. Say, hey, how does it feel around here? What's it like? Do you work well with the other teams? How do you feel they're working? Oh, yeah, and then say, yeah, we're collaborating better together. Say, actually, I don't think anything's really changed. And that's helpful insight. And it's not to go back and say, well, I heard from so-and-so, but it's another layer of insight for you as part of your seeking assurance, make sure the organization is being well run.
And you touched on it there, Ozzie, but a key thing is like diplomacy and confidentiality in how you manage the role. So there's a maturity that's needed. And I guess with 20 years of board experience at 32, you've had lots of opportunities to develop that so that you can sort of manage those sensitive situations when they come up.
And coming back to what we said earlier, it's also a good skill if you're coming from a HR people background. Like diplomacy, confidentiality is like a huge part of your job in managing that. And I think on the board, absolutely right. There are many things that you will know ahead of time for many people in the organization, but you can't always tell them, you can't always talk to other people about. Hence why building those good relationships with the leadership team, with your other board colleagues is helpful, because sometimes you want to have an opportunity just to offload or say, I'm thinking about this, or I saw this in the papers. Can I just bend your ear for a minute and just kind of talk you through this? And they might give a different perspective. And those relationships are important because you can't tell everyone, you can't talk to everyone else about it. It just wouldn't be appropriate.
You're 32. Looking ahead to the rest of your career, what's your hope for UK boardrooms?
I think this is probably really simple to me, actually, that they have more young people on them. Now, I've been doing this since I was 13. I'll be 33 in a couple of months. And the composition of boards is still very, very, very similar. It hasn't shifted. I think in some aspects, boards might have got slightly less diverse. Whereas I think what's important for me, from my perspective, is that having different voices around the table often leads to better conversations. And so how do we get more different voices in the room and around the table? And that's, some people say we have shadow trustee schemes, which can be helpful, but I'm actually a really big job of giving people the actual, I think we're agreeing here, giving the actual role and responsibility, like everybody else around the room. So they have the experience of actually doing the jobs. And that means sometimes we go out and we say, oh, you need to have had board experience. But you need to question, what are the skills you need to have demonstrated from board experience? Those are the skills you're looking for. You may find in other places that aren't necessarily in boardroom. You might have other things where you can demonstrate the potential to understand these things. As a board, we can set the appointment lengths in terms of people. So you might actually appoint for 1 year, that works, might extend it for 3 years. Gives everyone, the individual in the organization, a slightly lower risk way of taking it forward. My big honest thing would be just accept people on the board for 3 years. Take them, teach them, train them. They become a hugely valuable asset. I think that's definitely what I feel like I've done throughout my career and what I continue to do. If I look at the BITC advisory panel, working with lots of young people, someone messaged me yesterday, just saying they got a new board role, and I've been coaching them saying, how do you get on the board? How do you provide the application? Do your interviews? And I think we can hopefully see more of that in the future. And we'll have boardrooms looking a lot different and probably a lot more like the country that we are.
Ozzie, that's incredible. Thank you. What a vision for the future. And that's definitely one that Dynamic Boards shares. So Ozzie, thank you so much for your time. And for anyone watching this, I really hope it's inspired you to consider applying maybe for your first board role, for your second, for board roles in different sorts of organisations as well. And if you know of any young people, this is a fantastic story to share, to say, look, you can start developing the skills to be on boards when you're 13. Thank you, Ozzie, for your time.
Thank you.